She only wanted to help an injured stranger, but in that quiet moment their lives secretly changed. The maid had no idea the man she was saving carried a dark crown, a lonely heart, and a destiny tied to hers forever. Rain moved across the courtyard like a quiet memory, soaking the stones and softening every sound. The maid wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders as she carried a bucket toward the old well, thinking only about finishing her chores before night grew colder. But then she saw him, a stranger sitting in the shadows, one glove torn and blood sliding slowly across his hand. She hesitated because something about him felt powerful, dangerous, and deeply lonely at the same time. When she stepped closer, the lantern light touched his face. Pale skin, calm eyes, a presence that felt older than the castle itself. He didn't ask for help. He simply looked at her with quiet exhaustion, as if he had lived through too many winters and was tired of pretending he wasn't hurt. She knelt beside him and gently took his hand. His skin was cold, almost unnatural, and the wound looked deep. She cleaned it carefully, whispering small apologies every time he flinched. She wondered why a man dressed in dark embroidered clothing like hidden royalty would be sitting alone at the edge of the grounds, but she did not question him. She only worked, patient and humble, the way she always did. The stranger studied her face. Inside his eyes lived storms, guilt, sorrow, and something softer that he fought to hide. Kindness like hers was dangerous. Kindness slipped past the armor he had carried for centuries. Finally, his voice broke the silence. He spoke quietly, almost pleading. He said, "You shouldn't help me. People who come close to me always pay a price." And when he said it, he spoke not as a man, but as Adrian, the vampire king, cursed and hidden beneath ordinary shadows. She lifted her gaze and answered softly, "I don't help people because it is safe. I help because someone should." Her words were simple, but they reached the part of him that still remembered what it meant to care. For the first time in a very long time, Adrian felt seen not as the vampire king, not as a legend wrapped in fear, but as someone who was quietly hurting. The rain slowed. The courtyard seemed to hold its breath. Something began to change between them, gentle and dangerous at the same time, like the moment before dawn appears. She tied the bandage and gave him a small, sincere smile. "There," she whispered, "you're not alone anymore." The words struck him deeply. He wanted to warn her. He wanted to tell her about the throne, the curse, the hunters, the shadows that followed his name. But before he could speak, he heard it, boots hitting stone, voices calling through the night, guards searching for the vanished king. Fear darkened his eyes, not for himself, but for her. He opened his mouth to finally tell her the truth. And then the footsteps came closer, echoing through the courtyard, and everything around them suddenly froze. The guards, voices cut through the night, moving closer, carrying worry instead of anger. The maid's breath caught in her throat as she looked back at the stranger she had just helped. His eyes shifted, sharp, alert, suddenly royal. In that moment she understood one thing: he wasn't just hiding. He was protecting something or someone. But before she could ask, he gently took her wrist, careful not to frighten her. Adrian's voice was low and urgent. "Listen to me. If they see us together, they will question you. They will not believe you helped out of kindness." There was no threat in his words, only fear, fear for her. He stood slowly, cloak falling around him like living shadow, and for a heartbeat the truth shimmered in the air around them. King, immortal, cursed. Yet instead of commanding her, he whispered, "Stay behind the lantern. Do not speak unless they ask. I will take the blame." She didn't understand everything, but she knew one thing: this man, this vampire king, was not the monster old rumors painted. He stepped forward as the guards entered the courtyard, armor glinting, faces tense with worry. "Your Majesty," one of them breathed, relieved, bowing deeply. "We thought you were gone. The council feared the hunters had reached the castle." Adrian simply nodded, his expression composed again, hiding the vulnerability she had just seen. The maid lowered her gaze, heart racing, unsure whether to feel afraid or honored. One guard noticed the bandage around Adrian's hand and frowned. "Who treated you?" he asked. Silence hung between them. She felt the weight of it, the risk, the thousand ways this moment could turn against her. Before she could speak, Adrian stepped between her and their questions, voice calm but final. "I handled it myself," he said, "and no one else is to be bothered about it." The guards accepted his answer, but their eyes still drifted toward her, curious. They didn't know who she was, only a maid, only a shadow in the castle. Still, something inside her stirred: courage, humility, the strange warmth that comes when kindness is returned. and beneath it all, an unexplainable connection to the man who had just protected her, even though he owed her nothing. As they turned to escort him back, Adrian paused, just for a second. His gaze found hers, gentle and grateful. No words passed between them, but a promise lived there, a quiet acknowledgement that their paths were now tied, whether either of them wanted it or not. Then he walked away, his cloak trailing like nightfall, the guards surrounding him like a living wall. The courtyard fell silent again. Only the lantern remained, flickering softly, as if holding the memory of everything that had just happened. She pressed her hand to her chest, feeling the rhythm of her heartbeat change. Somewhere inside the castle walls, the vampire king carried her kindness with him, and something told her this was only the beginning. That night, as she returned to the servants' hall, a whisper moved through the castle corridor, a rumor, a warning, a prophecy, and when she heard Adrian's name spoken with fear and awe, she realized how dangerous the truth really was. And just before sleep finally found her, a knock echoed at the servants' door. The knock at the servants' door came again, soft, careful, as if it did not wish to wake the sleeping world. The maid hesitated before opening it, heart tight with uncertainty. When she slowly pulled the door aside, she expected to see a guard, maybe the head maid, maybe trouble, but instead there stood an older woman wrapped in a dark cloak, eyes gentle yet knowing. She spoke quietly, "The king requests your presence." "Do not be afraid." The words felt unreal. No servant was ever summoned at this hour. Still, something deeper than fear guided her steps as she followed the woman through silent corridors. The castle at night felt different. Torches burned low, shadows stretching long across the walls like secrets that had learned to breathe. Every hallway whispered stories she was never meant to hear. When they reached a tall, carved door, the woman bowed slightly and left her alone. For a moment she stood still, unsure if she should knock, but before she could, the door opened from within. Adrian stood there, without a crown, without guards, dressed in simple dark robes that made him look less like a king and more like a man who had carried too much for too long. He motioned her inside. The room was quiet, shelves filled with books, curtains drawn against the moonlight, a fire glowing softly in the hearth. Adrian's voice was careful, almost fragile. "You saved me tonight," he said. "People rarely do things for me without wanting something in return." She shook her head, embarrassed. "I didn't save a king," she replied softly. "I helped someone who was hurt." Those words unsettled him in ways battles never had. For centuries, everyone had seen the throne, the power, the fear, never the loneliness beneath it. Adrian walked toward the window and stared out at the dark courtyard, fingers brushing the bandage she had tied. "There are people outside these walls," he said quietly, "hunters who believe my existence is a curse. There are nobles inside these walls who only see me as a weapon, and yet tonight you treated me as if I were simply human." His confession hung in the air, fragile and honest. She could feel the weight he carried, rulership, immortality, and the burden of never belonging completely to any world. She wanted to comfort him, but she was still only a maid, unsure how close she was allowed to stand near a king, let alone a vampire king. Still, courage moved gently through her. "Everyone deserves care," she whispered, "even those who think they don't." Their eyes met, not in defiance, not in fear, but in quiet recognition. Something unspoken formed between them, delicate and dangerous, like a candle flame refusing to die. Then Adrian's expression shifted, serious and protective. "Because you helped me," he said, "you may be questioned, there will be rumors, some might try to use you to reach me." The thought sent a chill through her chest. He stepped closer, voice steady with determination. "So from this night forward, you will work in the inner halls under my protection." She didn't know whether to feel honored or terrified. Servants did not simply move into the king's circle. That kind of change always came with consequences. Before she could respond, a loud crash echoed from somewhere deep inside the castle, metal striking stone, voices shouting, fear rising like smoke. Adrian's eyes darkened instantly, instincts sharpening. He turned toward the door, every part of him shifting from vulnerable king to silent guardian. "Stay here," he said firmly, his voice no longer gentle but commanding, ancient, dangerous. And as he disappeared into the corridor, the flames in the hearth flickered wildly, leaving her alone in the king's chamber, wondering if the danger he spoke of had finally arrived and whether she had just stepped into a world she could never escape. The room seemed to shrink after Adrian left, each second stretching into something thin and fragile. The maid stood beside the fire, listening to distant echoes racing through the castle halls. Shouts rose, then faded. Metal scraped stone again. Somewhere, doors slammed. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to breathe slowly, trying not to imagine the worst. The warmth of the hearth felt smaller now, like a candle trying to fight a storm. Minutes passed that felt like hours until the chamber door opened sharply. It wasn't Adrian, it was a young guard, pale, sweating, eyes darting as if every shadow might strike him. He froze when he saw her. "You're not supposed to be here," he whispered, half frightened, half suspicious. She swallowed. "His Majesty brought me," she answered gently. The guard hesitated, then lowered his voice. "There was a breach. Someone crossed the outer walls. The council thinks hunters are testing the defenses." A fear flickered across his expression. Then, just as quickly, he was gone again, leaving her with more questions than before. The door opened a second time, and this time Adrian stepped in, cloak stirring with cold air from the hallway. His eyes were darker now, focused, calculating, but beneath the strength she saw something else, concern. He closed the door and exhaled slowly, as if carrying the weight of an entire kingdom on his shoulders. "No one is hurt," he said softly, answering the question she hadn't asked. "But someone wanted us to know they could get close." His voice carried quiet anger, not explosive, but controlled, like a storm that knew exactly where it would eventually break. He moved toward the fire and studied the flames, their light painting his face in gold and shadow. "This is why I warned you," Adrian continued. "Kindness draws attention, and attention in my world becomes danger." She stepped closer, careful yet steady. "Then let me stand carefully," she replied, "but don't ask me to stop caring." The simplicity of her words unsettled him again. So many people obeyed out of fear, she stayed out of choice. For a moment, silence wrapped around them, not empty, but full of something unspoken. Adrian looked at her with a tenderness he tried to hide. "You remind me of someone I failed long ago," he said quietly. "Someone I could not protect." The confession slipped out before he could stop it. She didn't press. Instead, she simply stood beside him, sharing the silence like two people watching the same uncertain horizon. A knock sounded at the chamber door, firm, official. Adrian's expression hardened. "Enter," he said. An elder counselor stepped inside, bowing deeply. His eyes slid to the maid, then back to the king. "Your Majesty, this servant was seen near the courtyard earlier," the man said carefully. "Some believe she might have spoken to the intruders." The accusation was wrapped in politeness, but it was still an accusation. The maid felt the room tilt, heat rushing to her face. Before she could defend herself, Adrian stepped forward, voice calm but edged with iron. "She was with me," he said, "and anyone who questions her loyalty questions mine." The counselor stiffened, uneasy. "Of course, my king," he murmured, retreating. But as he left, the look in his eyes made something clear. They had just painted a quiet target on her back. When the door closed, the maid finally found her breath. "You didn't have to do that," she whispered. Adrian's gaze softened. "Yes," he replied, "I did." His hand brushed the bandage she had given him, not touching her, but lingering close, as if the memory itself was fragile. Outside, the castle bells began to toll, slow and heavy, summoning the council for an emergency meeting. Adrian turned toward the sound, jaw tightening, the king fully returning to his place in the world of duty and danger. "I have to go," he said. "Stay here. Do not open the door for anyone unless it is me." And as he left once more, the fire dimmed, shadows lengthened, and a single thought whispered through her mind. If the world already suspected her, what would happen when they discovered just how close she truly was to the vampire King Adrian? Night wrapped the castle in a heavier silence as the bells faded. The maid sat near the hearth, hands folded in her lap, trying to steady the thoughts rushing through her. She had never been important before, never noticed, never discussed, and now every corridor, every whisper, every footstep outside the door felt like it might be about her. She wondered when simple kindness had turned into something so dangerous, and why, despite the fear, she did not regret helping Adrian at all. Time passed slowly. The fire burned lower. Somewhere far below, voices rose and fell, the council arguing, debating, judging. She imagined them seated in a long, echoing hall, talking about threats, intruders, politics, and perhaps about her. The idea made her chest tighten. Still, she remembered Adrian's voice, calm, certain, when he said he would protect her. That memory became a small anchor inside her, something warm to hold on to. The door opened quietly and she stood at once, expecting another guard, but it was not a guard. It was an elderly servant, one who had worked in the castle for many years. The woman looked at her with kind, worried eyes. Child, she whispered, the council does not like change. They do not like when the king trusts people they did not choose. She placed a folded cloak on the bed. Wear this. If anyone asks questions, say you are assigned to the inner halls by order of His Majesty, and speak carefully. There are ears in every wall. Then, with a soft nod, she slipped away, leaving behind both comfort and warning. A while later, the chamber door opened again, this time with weight and purpose. Adrian stepped inside, shoulders tense from long hours of discussion. He looked different, not cold, not cruel, but burdened, as if every decision carried invisible chains. Yet when he saw her standing there, relief touched his expression for a heartbeat. "Thank you for waiting," he said quietly. "The council will investigate the breach. They want stronger patrols, more control, more fear." Oh, he sounded tired of it, tired of rule that demanded walls instead of trust. She wanted to ask what they had said about her, but her courage faltered. He noticed anyway. "They questioned your presence," Adrian admitted gently. "They asked why a maid was near the courtyard, why I allowed you inside these chambers." He paused, then continued, "I told them the truth, that you acted with kindness and that I chose to protect you." His eyes held hers steady. "I will not let them use you as a tool against me." His words warmed her, yet they also deepened the weight in her heart, because protection from a king came with attention, and attention came with risk. "Why me?" she finally whispered. "There are many servants. Why does it matter that I helped?" Adrian was silent for a long, thoughtful moment. Then he said, "Because you saw a wound and did not see a throne, because you spoke to me as a person and not as a legend. I have ruled for centuries, and still that is rare." He turned slightly, looking into the flames, as if speaking to memories. "Once someone else treated me the same way and I failed them. This time I will not." The honesty in his voice carried weight, grief, and promise all at once. She felt her fear soften into something more complicated: trust, empathy, a fragile thread of connection she had not expected to find. A distant horn sounded outside, signaling a patrol shift. Adrian's expression sharpened. "You will begin work tomorrow in the inner halls," he said. "Close to the Queen's old library near my council room. You will be safer there under my watch." It felt like both a blessing and a boundary, a new life unfolding inside walls she had never been allowed to cross. But before the moment could settle, a messenger banged on the outer door, voice trembling. "Your Majesty, there's a message. It was left at the gate." Adrian frowned, accepting the sealed parchment. He broke the wax, eyes scanning the words, and the fire seemed suddenly colder. He folded the note slowly, carefully, as if it were something poisonous. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, too quiet. "Well, they know your face," Adrian said. And in that single sentence, the room changed, the air tightened, and the danger they had only imagined began to feel painfully, terrifyingly real. The parchment trembled slightly between Adrian's fingers, though his expression remained composed. The maid watched him carefully, sensing the storm beneath the stillness. He placed the note on the table, smoothing it flat as if refusing to let fear crease it further. "Someone watched you in the courtyard," he said quietly. "They left this message to make sure I knew." He didn't read the words aloud, but she could feel their weight. A warning, a threat, a promise that the hunters were closer than anyone wished to admit. She swallowed, her voice soft. "Does this mean I have to leave the castle?" The question hurt more than she expected. This place, once only stone and duty, had become something else, a world where kindness mattered, where she had seen the heart behind the crown. Adrian shook his head slowly. "If I send you away, they will follow you. If you stay, I can protect you." His tone wasn't controlling, it was careful, responsible, shaped by centuries of learning what fear could do to good people. "But staying will change your life. Whispers will follow you. Eyes will watch. Are you willing?" She looked down at her hands, remembering the first night, a stranger in pain, a simple act of care. She had not chosen power or danger or secrets. She had only chosen compassion, yet somehow that choice had opened a door she could not close again. When she lifted her gaze, there was steady courage inside it. "I don't want to live by fear," she whispered. "If kindness led me here, then I will stand where it brought me." Her voice trembled, but the decision did not. For a moment, something gentle and unguarded passed across Adrian's face, not gratitude alone, but respect. He stepped nearer, keeping a respectful distance, as if aware of how easily closeness could be misunderstood. "Then you will not stand alone," he said. "From today forward, your work and your safety fall under my direct care." The words were not a royal decree in his tone, they sounded more like a promise made between two people who had chosen trust. Days began to change after that. The maid moved quietly through the inner halls, learning new routes, new tasks, new watchful smiles. Some whispered, some judged, some softened when they realized she carried no ambition, only sincerity. And each evening, somewhere between duty and silence, she would glimpse Adrian in the council wing or the library, his presence steady, thoughtful, carrying the calm strength of someone who had lived too long with loneliness and was only now remembering what connection felt like. But the hunters did not vanish. Messages came and went. Shadows tested the castle walls, and through it all, Adrian remained patient, not cruel, not ruthless, instead choosing vigilance over fear, compassion over panic. Little by little, she understood. The Vampire King was not a legend built from terror, but a guardian who had learned to suffer quietly so others would not. One evening, as winter pressed against the windows, Adrian called her again to the quiet chamber where everything had first begun. The fire glowed warmly. The danger had not disappeared, but tonight the room did not feel threatened, it felt honest. There may be more storms, he said gently. There may be more nights where fear stands at the door, but because you stayed, the castle remembers hope again. He paused, searching for the right words. "Oh, you changed something in me and in this place, simply by refusing to stop being kind." She felt tears rise not from sadness, but from a feeling she had never known so deeply, purpose. She bowed her head slightly humbled. "And you showed me," she replied softly, "that power can be gentle, that even a king can choose compassion." The fire crackled. Outside, the wind carried winter across the stone towers. Inside, there was no crown between them, no throne, no legend, only two lives that had crossed at the moment they needed courage the most. And though the future still held secrets, one truth was clear. The night she helped a wounded stranger, without knowing he was the vampire King Adrian, she did not just save a life, she began to heal a heart that had been silent for centuries. And somewhere beyond the castle walls, the hunters readied their plans. While inside, Hope quietly learned how to stay. Winter settled over the kingdom like a long breath, quiet and heavy. Snow gathered along the castle walls, softening every sharp edge, making even danger seem distant for a while. Yet whispers continued, rumors in taverns, murmurs among travelers, shadows that moved where they shouldn't. The maid felt them the way one feels a storm building far away. She worked steadily in the inner halls, learning to move with grace, learning when to remain unseen, learning what it meant to stand near power without letting it change who she was. One night the wind howled so fiercely that torches flickered in the corridors. The council gathered once more, voices low, tense, circling the same fear. The hunters had formed an alliance. They wanted not only the throne, they wanted the end of every creature like Adrian. And though she was not meant to hear such things, the maid sensed the truth. This would not be a night of quiet watching. This would be a test of the king of the castle and of the promise he had made to protect her. When the warning bell finally sounded, it was not loud, only one long, measured toll meant for those who understood. Adrian met her in the library, the room washed in the pale glow of moonlight through high windows. He carried no crown, only resolve. "They will try to draw me out," he said gently. "They believe I lead with mercy because I am weak. They do not understand that mercy is a choice." His eyes softened. "I want you to stay here. There is a passage behind the shelves. If the doors fail, you go." "Do you understand?" Her heart pounded, but she shook her head. "I cannot run from the place that gave me shelter," she whispered, "and I cannot leave you to fight alone." The words surprised even her, yet they felt true. She was no warrior, no knight, no hero. She simply refused to abandon the one who had never abandoned her. Adrian looked at her for a long moment, not as a servant, not as a subject, but as someone whose courage humbled him. The confrontation came quietly. No armies, no shouting. Only three cloaked figures stepping into the courtyard, carrying blades etched with old symbols, eyes reflecting hatred disguised as righteousness. Adrian walked out to meet them beneath the snowlit sky while guards waited at the edges, ready yet restrained. The maid remained at the window above, heart aching, fingers pressed to the glass. She watched as the hunters spoke, accusing, threatening, promising salvation through destruction. But Adrian did not answer with rage. He spoke with dignity, with the calm strength of someone who had seen centuries of fear and still chosen compassion. "I do not rule by terror," he told them. "If you call that weakness, then you do not understand power." And when they lunged, not toward him, but toward the entrance where the servants lived, she understood the truth. They wanted fear, not victory. They wanted to break hope where it had begun. What happened next was not violent spectacle, only swift protection. Adrian moved not as a monster, but as a shield. Guards intercepted, barriers rose, magic older than the castle hummed like a vow around the gates. The hunters were driven back, not destroyed, warned instead, leave or face justice that still remembered mercy. They vanished into the snow, furious and defeated, but the message had been delivered. Later, when the courtyard quieted, Adrian returned to the library, snow melting in his dark hair, shoulders carrying exhaustion and relief. She stepped toward him, shaking slightly, overwhelmed by everything she had witnessed. He said only, "It is over for now." Then, softer, "And because you stayed, I remembered why I choose the path I walk." In the days that followed, life slowly returned to rhythm. Fear loosened its grip. The castle learned to breathe again. The maid continued her work not as a symbol, not as a curiosity, but as someone trusted, someone seen. And though danger never vanished completely, it no longer ruled her heart. One evening, standing by the window where moonlight spilled across the floor, Adrian spoke quietly. "I cannot promise a world without shadows," he said, "but I can promise that while I reign, power will never forget kindness because you reminded me of it." She smiled not out of pride, but out of gratitude, because the stranger she once helped was no longer only a mystery, no longer only the vampire king. He was Adrian, a ruler who had learned to be gentle again. And she, once an unnoticed maid, had discovered that sometimes the smallest act, a hand bandaged in the rain, can change the course of lives, kingdoms, and hearts. So the story did not end with victory or fear. It ended with something quieter, stronger, and meant to last. A hope staying even in the darkest castle. And two people bound not by power, but by compassion, walking forward into whatever future waited next spring arrived slowly, as if the world itself needed time to heal. Snow melted into clear streams, and the gardens behind the castle finally began to bloom again. The maid noticed how light returned to places that once felt haunted, corners where servants used to whisper now filled with quiet laughter, softer footsteps, less fear. Everything seemed calmer. Yet inside her heart, there was a question that never quite disappeared. One afternoon, while sorting old books in the Queen's library, she found a worn leather journal tucked deep between two heavy histories. Curiosity guided her fingers. When she opened it, the ink felt familiar, the handwriting precise. It belonged to Adrian. But it was not a king's record. It was a man's private pain. Pages spoke of centuries of loss, loneliness, and the endless struggle to rule without becoming the monster others expected. She closed it quickly, not wanting to betray trust, yet the glimpse deepened her understanding of him. That evening, she returned the journal to his chamber and confessed honestly. "I found this by accident," she said softly. "I did not read it all, but what I saw made me ache for you." Adrian listened quietly, then surprised her by not being angry. Instead, he sighed gently. "I left it there on purpose," he admitted. "A reminder to myself that even kings need someone who sees beyond the crown." He looked at her with calm sincerity. "And now someone does." Days turned into weeks, and their bond changed, not dramatic, not forbidden, simply deeper. They spoke more often about choices, burdens, kindness, and the strange balance between fear and compassion. Adrian trusted her not because she obeyed, but because she understood. And she trusted him not because he was powerful, but because he chose to use that power gently. Then one dusk, as lanterns lit the corridors, Adrian asked her to walk with him through the quiet courtyard where everything had begun. The well still stood. The stones still remembered the rain. He stopped beside it and rested his hand on the old stone rim. "The night you found me here," he said, "I believed I had failed this kingdom again, but you treated me like a man, not a myth, and every decision since has been shaped by that simple truth." She felt humbled. "I only did what anyone should," she whispered. Adrian smiled faintly. "Perhaps, but not everyone does." He turned toward her, his expression steady, grounded. "I cannot erase the danger from your life, but if you choose to remain here, it will not be because fate trapped you, it will be because you decided to stand beside someone who needed your courage." For a long moment, she looked at the castle, the gardens, the sky slowly turning gold. This was no fairy tale. It was a life, complicated, demanding, uncertain, yet she felt peace instead of fear. "Then I choose to stay," she said gently, "not for protection but for purpose." Adrian bowed his head slightly in quiet respect, a king honoring someone who was once just a maid. And just like that, the story stopped being about hunters, curses, or shadows. It became about two hearts learning that strength does not always roar. Sometimes it simply refuses to abandon kindness. And so the castle moved forward into seasons, yet unwritten, guarded not only by walls and guards, but by something far stronger. The memory of one night in the rains. And the promise that compassion, once awakened, would never sleep again. Summer came quietly without celebration. It did not rush into the kingdom, it arrived like a gentle guest, warming stone corridors, brightening courtyards, and softening the shadows that once felt endless. Life moved with new rhythm. Children in the village laughed again. Traders spoke with less fear. Even the council, cautious and proud, began to notice that a calm ruled the land instead of dread. And though they never said it aloud, many of them knew why. One afternoon, the maid stood near the balcony overlooking the valley. From there, she could see the far road winding toward the mountains, the same road where rumors once traveled faster than truth. She wondered how a single act, a simple kindness in the rain, had turned her life into something unrecognizable. Not grand, not royal, but meaningful. She no longer felt like someone who only passed through rooms unseen. She had purpose now, quiet, steady, rooted. Adrian joined her there, his steps soundless as always. He stood beside her, hands resting lightly on the stone railing, gaze drifting over the horizon. "There is something I have learned," he said, voice thoughtful. "For centuries I believed strength meant standing alone, but standing alone only made the darkness louder." He glanced toward her, the faintest smile touching his expression. "Now the darkness feels quieter." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she let the silence belong to both of them, peaceful, honest. Then she said softly, "You never truly ruled alone. You only needed someone to remind you that you didn't have to." Her words carried no claim, no pride, only truth. Adrian closed his eyes briefly, as if the sentence itself eased an old wound. Not long after, a messenger arrived from a distant province, not with threats but with a request. The people wanted guidance rebuilding after years of fear. They wanted safety but also hope. Adrian listened carefully, then turned to her. "Walk with me tomorrow," he said. "I want you to see the kingdom with your own eyes. Sometimes rulers forget the faces behind their decisions. You remind me not to forget." The invitation surprised her. She had always belonged to the inner halls, the quiet corners. Traveling beyond the castle felt like stepping into another world, but she agreed not out of duty but out of trust. And when morning came, they rode together with a small escort through fields painted gold with sunlight. People bowed when they saw Adrian, yes, but they also smiled, not from fear, from relief. Children approached shyly with flowers. Elders spoke of lost seasons finally returning. And each time someone thanked the king, Adrian simply listened, offering calm words and gentle assurances, never promising impossibilities, only promising presence. And the maid began to realize something profound. Power did not live in crowns or thrones or titles. It lived in the choices made quietly, consistently, every day. That night, beneath a sky scattered with stars, they camped near a small river. The guards slept nearby. The fire burned low. Adrian sat across from her, the reflection of flames moving softly in his eyes. "One day," he said gently, "stories will be told about this era. They may forget my laws, they may forget my victories, but I hope they remember this, that we tried to rule with kindness." She nodded slowly. "They will," she whispered, "because kindness leaves marks deeper than fear." The river murmured, the night held them in stillness, and somewhere far beyond the hills, the last echoes of old threats faded into nothing more than distant memory. Not because danger vanished, but because courage, compassion, and patience had learned how to stand together. And as the fire dimmed, the maid realized something she had never truly understood before. Oh, she had not been chosen by fate. Oh, she had chosen to stay. Chosen to care, chosen to believe that even a vampire king named Adrian could lead a world gently. And in that choice, quietly, beautifully, she had rewritten both of their lives.